I'm joined by independent salmon biologist Alexandra Morton from Sointula, BC, and we're here today to talk about a groundbreaking legal victory that she won recently in federal court on May 6th regarding the salmon farming industry's ability or lack of ability going forward to rely on hatchery fish to grow their farmed fish that may contain viruses or diseases. And I'll just warn our viewers that we are reaching Alex here on the coast. Internet connection isn't super strong, so you may experience a little bit of glitchiness with the video. Alex, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you bet, Damien. It's good to be here with you.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about this case. It was, as I understand, about 11 months in the making from the time you presented your evidence about this time last year, and you finally heard back from the judge about 2 weeks ago or so. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the case itself and the broad strokes of it.
Yeah, so just over 2 years ago, I received a tip that the juvenile salmon in the freshwater hatchery on land belongs to Marine Harvest near Campbell River was infected with a virus called Piscine reovirus, and that these fish were going out into on the Fraser sockeye migration route, the migration route of a lot of wild salmon. So I began to just investigate on my own. Was this legal? Turns out in the license that the federal government gave to each fish farm, there was a clause in it saying that the company, the fish farm company, could make the decision as to whether to use diseased fish or not. So in other words, whether to transfer diseased Atlantic salmon smolts from a freshwater hatchery into the ocean. And I went to a number of lawyers to ask them what they thought of this, because the Fisheries Act said you can't put diseased fish in the water. Eco-Justice took the case. We argued it June of last year, and 11 months later we got the decision from Justice Donald Rennie, Federal Court of Canada, and he said that the Minister of Fisheries had unlawfully given away her power to the fish farm industry to make a decision as to whether or not to use diseased fish. This was pretty huge because the Fisheries Act said you can't use diseased fish. The license said you could, so there was something that had to give, and the judge ruled that the Fisheries Act holds. So today, as it stands, the Minister of Fisheries could still give these companies the permission to use diseased fish. But it remains to be seen whether she will decide to do that. Will she appeal the decision? Is she comfortable making this decision, or does she want the fish farm companies to be the one to decide whether to use diseased fish or not?
Now, what's at stake here for the industry? This sounds like, from the way that you've been discussing it since the decision, that this is potentially a pretty big blow to the industry. Is it the fact that there's so many viruses and potential diseases in these hatchery fish that in order for them to comply with this order and only use non-diseased fish for raising their broods, or their commercial product in these open net pens, that would be carry a tremendous cost to them, or it would be prohibitive to their business and ability to produce the kinds of volumes of product that they have been?
Well, these are good questions. So the case revolved around one virus called Piscine reovirus, which we never had heard of on this coast before about 2012. And what happened was I took some samples, sent them to a lab, tested for this virus, and yes, they were positive. The provincial BC veterinarian, Dr. Gary Marty, said on CBC that, oh yeah, 75% of the BC Atlantic salmon farming industry is infected with Piscine reovirus. And so it was Piscine reovirus that the hatchery was infected with and putting out into the ocean. What the judge said was, in his view, this virus is a concern to Pacific wild salmon, and therefore it should not be going into the ocean. And if it does go into the ocean, the minister's going to have to make this decision about every single transfer. I have since done a lot of testing of farm salmon from the supermarkets of British Columbia, and most of them are infected with this virus. So we have my work and Dr. Gary Marty's statement. I don't know if the BC salmon farming industry has fish that are not infected with this virus. If they are in fact not allowed to put Piscine reovirus infected smolts into our ocean, do they still have an industry? Now, the question is, how will we be able to ground truth this? The judge gave the industry 4 months to comply. Marine Harvest, who is the company I took to court, came out in the media and said they do not put unhealthy fish in the water. That's a very soft term because Piscine reovirus can be carried and transmitted, and the farm salmon itself might be in a state of health, but it could still be, broadcasting this virus into the migration routes of our wild salmon. So they're saying nothing in their operations is going to change. What will have to happen is we will need to have verification that their fish are not infected. And so if the industry wants us to believe that they do not carry Piscine reovirus, they are going to have to open their hatcheries, do some kind of third-party testing so that we can confirm this. At the moment, we're not sure if the Minister of Fisheries, Gail Shea, is going to appeal this decision. That would certainly be interesting. And we're standing by on that. We don't know. There was some mention in Ottawa that she was considering this.
I assume you mentioned this as heart and skeletal muscular inflammation disease that you believe, and the judge seemed to concur that there is a connection between that disease, which affects it's a form of heart disease to fish, and this Piscine reovirus that would potentially lead into this disease, and therefore is something that we should be very careful about. But I gather that this ruling would affect more than just that one virus and potentially disease, rather a whole gamut of different viruses that you've talked about before and that came out in the Cohen Commission and other places. So this could be a much bigger issue than just that one virus and disease that was at the center of this case, I gather.
Yes, that's right. I mean, the judge said you can't put diseased fish in the water. It doesn't matter if it's an exotic virus or a local virus. It could be IHN. Because the problem with salmon farms is that they concentrate disease, like chicken farms, pig farms. And in the wild, fish are always moving. Predators take out the sick ones. So you don't get this buildup of potentially sick fish releasing. But DFO said at the Cohen Commission, 65 billion infectious viral particles can be released per hour by a salmon farm with a disease outbreak. So, I mean, this is a huge concern when you consider the narrow channels that these farms are put in, and then all of our South Coast salmon are going through that area. So, yeah, it's a very significant decision. When I posted this decision on my Facebook page, 260,000 people viewed it. I've been getting calls from other countries where people are very discouraged with how the salmon farming industry is impacting their wild fish, their economies, their local wildlife. And they want to know the specifics of how this decision worked because they're planning to take legal action as well. It's really too bad it has come down to the courts. I mean, the judge, he said some really interesting things. He said the Minister of Fisheries cannot use unsupported science. He also said the minister is not erring on the side of caution by allowing the industry to do this. She abdicated her power and gave it to the industry, and that was unlawful. So I mean, what has been going on here in the waters in the last few years is actually unlawful. For as long as that license has been in use, which is a few years now, this has been unlawful behavior. The salmon farming industry is plagued with issues like this, whether it's sea lice or viruses. I wish they would just grow up, deal with their waste, put some solid boundaries around themselves, like all the other feedlots, and get their unfortunate animals away from our wild fish. this is not going to go away. I mean, the industry should understand this. There's people dogging them in every country now, from Tasmania to Norway, Canada, Chile, Scotland, Ireland. At some point, every industry just gets too big to get away with the little dirty stuff. And so in this case, this industry is using our oceans to flush clean its pens. That maybe was okay when there was a few farms, but they're planning a 40% increase on this coast right now. There's farms in the Broughton Archipelago that have nearly tripled in size, despite the fact we have another sea lice outbreak this year. This industry's out of control, and they need to mature, they need to grow up, and if they really are a long-term serious business, then they need to step up and deal with their waste. Nobody wants to deal with their waste, but really it's time. These guys have to deal with their waste now.
It's ironic that the judge made these comments, and I guess you can kind of read between the lines when he says the government can't rely on unsupported science anymore. That's precisely, and I very closely observed, as you know, the way that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and DFO and other authorities, provincial authorities as well, went after you and Dr. Fred Kibenge and others who worked very hard to procure and process and test samples of wild fish that you suspected may be infected with diseases that could be transmitted back and forth between farmed and wild fish. And that was very much the spirit of their criticisms of you and their stripping of Dr. Kibenge's OIE status for testing ISA was that this was somehow bad science. And yet it seems like they're the ones that are getting called out for that here, or that the industry and the government that's being very supportive of it is being cautioned here by the judge for using unsupported science, but also for not implementing the precautionary principle, which is something that's been at the heart of my concerns around the whole way that this industry has been managed for years to come. You talked about some of the kind of going forward and what the potential liability and ramifications could be for this industry that does seem to have a way of surviving many different court challenges, some of which that you've led and have been successful. The Cohen Commission and a broad range of criticisms that were brought out in that report, which haven't been implemented by the federal government as of yet. They seem to have a great sticking power and ability to avoid this kind of regulation and these sorts of problems. And yet you're suggesting that at this point, this ruling and other things that are piling up could eventually catch up with them. If for some reason they don't comply with the judge's order, you mentioned they'd be given 4 months to do that. What are the potential retroactive penalties, for instance, in how you can test these viruses and maybe tie them back to individual farms and hatchery operations? If they don't comply with this, are they setting themselves up potentially down the road for some big problems and damages, et cetera, based on this case?
If I was an investor in the salmon farming industry, I'd be very, very concerned about this issue in Canada, because viruses have barcodes on them. When you look at the genetic sequence of them, scientists can trace them because they're constantly changing. They leave a track. And for example, when the ISA virus went to Chile in Atlantic farm salmon, they figured out what hatchery they were from. That did not cause a big problem in Norway. There are no wild salmon in Chile, and for whatever reasons, there were no lawsuits. But if you jump forward to British Columbia, and a virus that causes heart damage that scientists say prevents salmon from going up the river, and you've got an industry that is 75% infected, and I would argue it's higher than that now, I would be concerned that that virus is going to be traced and that the impact of that virus is going to be discovered. The Norwegians certainly take it seriously. I mean, there is a myth in British Columbia right now that the virus did not cause disease, but that is an outlier position. There are many papers in Norway. They are trying to develop a vaccine for the virus. They're very serious about it. So I would be concerned that we're going to find that there's been enormous damage done by this virus. I mean, one of the difficult things about Piscine reovirus is that it is so durable. It seems to exist in rotting tissue. It exists in the fillets you buy in the supermarket. If you wash it in your sink, you're washing it into wherever your water goes. It can travel long distances outside the fish, just floating free in the water. This virus concerns me enormously. And so, yeah, I think there's potential for lawsuits going forward. You know, British Columbia wants to believe that the Piscine reovirus is benign. We had to get a legal decision on this virus, and Justice Donald Rennie said, in his view, the virus is the precursor of this heart disease, and thus this fish infected with this do not belong in our waters unless the minister will give express permission herself for every single transfer. And I'm not too sure she's up for that. So, yeah, this industry's a mess. I would be very, very worried if I was them, that there is going to be First Nations or commercial fishermen or sport fishermen or just your local citizenry who clearly love wild salmon, that there won't at some point be some enormous damages in the future. So I'm just saying, viruses can be traced. They're spilling out all over the place here, and I would be concerned if I was the industry.
Now let's talk a little bit just before we wrap up here, but looking forward here and some of the public work that you're doing. You've garnered a tremendous amount of support around this case, and this is built on top of the work you've been doing for many years on this particular issue. Tell me a little bit about you have a petition that has over 100,000 signatures on it, as far as I understand, that relates somehow to this case. Tell us a little bit about that and what else you're going to continue doing on your end of things to hold the industry and governments to account.
Yes, well, I have two petitions out right now. They're both on change.org, and one is asking the Premier of British Columbia not to expand this industry because there's applications pouring in. They're trying to get farms to be bigger. They're trying to get more farms. Over 107,000 people have signed this, and I think we're going to deliver it to the Premier pretty soon here. I have another petition to Norway, to the government of Norway, asking them to divest from dirty salmon. There's close to 10,000 signatures on that. It's a much more recent signature or a petition. Norway is a very socially conscious country. They have environmental policies, social policies. I visited the country in 2009. You and I went together. I loved Norway. But they don't realize, I don't think, that their industry is their diplomats in this country. Salmon farming industry is representing Norway. And in my personal view, this industry's behaved like bullies. They came into my community, they said, we're gonna be good for you, and we are gone. There's only 8 people left in my town. The recent tripling of size of the Sir Edmund farm was against the wishes of the local First Nations. So, I will continue to work with many and diverse groups. More and more people are just fed up with this industry. I am continuing my viral science despite all the odds, and the government has been pretty severe on this. And going forward, looking at some legal action as well. So I won't give up. I've been in this fight 25 years because they came and wrecked a place I love. And I'm hoping that we can find a solution because we can have aquaculture on land and we can have abundant wild salmon. It is not an either-or situation. And there's some very difficult decisions that need to go forward, but the time has come where this industry has really been seen for what it is. It is messy, dirty, old technology. It does not belong in this day and age. It does not belong in our oceans.
And it would seem that everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. And just so viewers are clear, the reason you raise these issues with Norway predominantly is because it's over 90% owned, correct, by these BC farms by 3 large Norwegian companies. So this clearly is a problem that extends beyond our borders here. And as you say, I mean, you and I have both been there a few times to Norway to talk to the industry there, and it does seem like there was a disconnect, certainly amongst their corporate leadership, as to the impacts that their industry is having on First Nations and coastal communities like yours, et cetera. But hopefully that's there's some potential for that to change. As you note, and one of the things that I've been really surprised about in the last number of years, working with DC Reed, columnist and reporter out of Victoria that you know of his work, and it published a number of stories in the Common Sense Canadian talking about the very few jobs that this industry actually creates, which is really in the hundreds, probably at a maximum of about 800. And we've heard numbers like 6,000 thrown around by this industry in the past. So it would seem that bringing in these kind of new technologies that you're talking about, closed containment, the Namgis First Nation, they have a pilot project going on. They seem to create more jobs. There's more technology that has to be invested in. And maybe there is a way, there might just be a way for this industry to evolve and create more jobs with a lower impact on the wild fish and on the coast. Do you think that that's something that can actually be achieved? Is it a realistic thing, or is this industry just too entrenched in its way of doing things and have too many historic kind of handouts from governments like ours that they're not interested in changing?
I think the Norwegian industry is going to go extinct in this format because they are so rigid in what they want to do. They do have a phenomenal ability to convince governments to give them things. I mean, my goodness, we pay them when their fish have to be killed from diseases. But I think there's a Canadian industry that wants to grow. And there's some innovative ideas where you grow the fish, you take the waste of the fish, you grow another crop. I mean, this really is the way of the future. But the Norwegian industry and that technology of being an enormous feedlot in our oceans, refusing to clean their waste, saying that viruses are not a problem when the federal courts are saying they are. Sea lice epidemic, this is the one thing we thought they could fix, and over 95% of the juvenile salmon leaving the Broughton are infected, and we now know that most of those infections are lethal. We've done the science. So I don't see any learning curve with the Norwegian industry, but I do see a lot of potential and innovation with the Canadian industry. And yeah, that's, I think, the way it's going to go.
We've been joined today by Alexandra Morton, independent salmon biologist from Sointula, BC, on the coast, surrounded by many of these farms and much of the wild values, the whales and the salmon that are really at stake here. And thank you very much for sharing a little bit about this court case. And it'll be very interesting to see where this goes, and we'll keep on top of it heading forward.